Oh, this is a tough one for me to do, the Declan Rice chat, because I don't think I've ever come away from an Arsenal game saying Declan Rice was really bad. I don't think I've ever come away feeling that way. I've felt at times that he's been a little bit off it and not been at the incredibly high level that we know he can be. I felt at the start of the season he looked a little bit tired. There were a few injuries here and there. And a lot of the time I attributed that down to the summer that he'd had in the Euros. And we saw that affect a lot of players across a number of clubs, right? So it was fair, I think, at that point to sort of just back off of Declan Rice, and say, look, he will come good again because we know he's that good of a footballer. Yesterday, it didn't happen for him. And I've seen a lot of suggestions online that West Ham United get in his head, and playing West Ham United is incredibly difficult for him. There was a little moment in the first half where Declan Rice went over to take a corner in front of the away section, and he sort of went over and was receiving a kind of mixed reception from the West Ham United fans. Most of them were giving him stick, but there were a few that were applauding him, and he gave them a sort of very subtle applause back as he went to take the corner. Anyway, after that, he just wasn't the same. And it felt to me like he was getting incredibly frustrated, like his mind was on the fact it was West Ham rather than just focusing on the elements of his performance that he can control. And we got into a situation where you started to look at Declan Rice and started to question whether or not, as that more advanced player, it suits him, you know. And look, for a long, long time, I've I've looked at Declan Rice and I've tried to figure out whether I think he's a 6 or an 8. And when he plays at 6, I think we have incredible defensive stability because of his mobility and how great an athlete he is. His reading of the game, all of that. I think he's really, really good in the 6, particularly at stopping transitions. And I think that's something he has that Thomas Partey just doesn't anymore. But I think Thomas Partey's passing range is a little bit more advanced, sophisticated, if you like. And for that reason, I quite like Thomas Partey sitting at the 6 because I think it helps us in terms of building up from deep. So I can't settle really on what I think Declan Rice's best position is. I think there are games where Declan Rice as an 8 works perfectly because his athleticism means that he can play as an 8 and a 6 at the same time and give you that little bit extra, both in the defensive phase of the game, but also in the offensive phase. When we're facing a low block, I don't know that Declan Rice has enough guile. And that this is not a slight on him. He's just not that type of player. Like, does he have those 1-2s in him that maybe Odegaard and a winger do, or Nwaneri and a winger do? No. And again, it's not a criticism of Declan Rice because I think he's an incredibly effective player. It's more a criticism of how we're utilizing him than anything else. I think it's a position that doesn't necessarily suit his skill set, particularly when you face against low blocks. And when we were 1-0 down and we go into the second half, and it became quite apparent and quite evident that we were going to have to start playing a little bit more of the sort of percentage game, working the ball into the box from wide or whatever. I was looking at Declan Rice and thinking, okay, you've not had the best game, but you know what? You're one of our more forceful players. You're one of our more physical players. You're one of our more determined players. And if we're putting balls into the penalty area and you got Marino there as the kind of standing jumper, the one that the centre-backs are focusing on, but you've got Declan Rice arriving in the box with that pace and physicality that he has, that could work. That could be how we unlock this West Ham United defence. And so when he was taken off, I was perplexed, man. I could not get my head around why that substitution was made. And I was on commentary yesterday and we were discussing it. And when I saw Declan Rice's 41 go up on the board, I was like, who's West Ham's 41? I'm looking at my notes in front of me and I'm trying to figure out who West Ham's number 41 is because it just didn't compute in my mind that Declan Rice was the one that we were taking off. Did he have a good game? No, not really. Was it one of his worst games? Probably, yes. But at the same time, like, what were you like? What was the alternative? Like, what was the alternative? Who were you bringing on that was going to give us more than Declan Rice? Declan Rice only needed a moment. Declan Rice only needed to use his athleticism and physical power to get on the end of something, or to unleash one of those ferocious shots that he lets fly and it take a deflection and end up in the back of the net. He, for me, even though he was having a really bad game by his standards, and if I just have a quick look at SofaScore's rating of him, they rate him at 6.9 out of 10. They rate him lowest of our three midfield players. Fine. Even if Declan Rice was having a bad game, I still think he was a really important player to keep on the pitch. And so when I realized that it was him that was coming off, and we were talking about it on commentary, I said to Jimmy Carter, who was doing the game alongside me, I said, Jimmy, surely he's picked up a knock. Surely he's picked up an injury, because to take Declan Rice off now doesn't quite feel right. Has he had the best game? No, but he's always capable of providing and producing that moment, that bit of brilliance. And so, yeah, for me, it didn't make any sense. So I was convinced, my co-commentator said it as well. I was convinced that there was something wrong. There was an issue. Maybe he'd felt something at halftime and he'd mentioned it. And so he was going to give it a little bit longer and see how we got on. I was convinced that there was another issue. So imagine my surprise when, after the game, I asked Mikel Arteta why he took Declan Rice off. And I said, I think a lot of the fans were surprised by that change. Was there another reason for it? Was it injury? Was it fatigue? What was it? And he said, no, it was purely tactical. I was like, what? Purely tactical. Now, I know a lot of people are going to disagree with this, by the way, because the general consensus appears to be that Declan Rice had a bad game, and he did. But sometimes you got to leave your best players on the pitch because they are capable of providing that one moment and producing that bit of brilliance. Who does he bring on? Alexander Zinchenko at left 8. For such a long time, so many of us have said, why don't we try Zinchenko at left 8? And Mikel Arteta has not wanted to go anywhere near that. He's not wanted to touch it. Yet in this instance, he does it. He brings him on, and Zinchenko put a couple of pretty crosses into the penalty area. But other than that, he was largely ineffective too. We lost that physical edge that we had in the midfield because we took out our most physical midfield player, and we ended up becoming easier and easier and easier to play through. And the amount of times that West Ham, post Declan Rice going off, were able to play the ball down that inside right channel, our inside left channel, and get it to Kudus nice and early and set off a counter-attack was unbelievable. That doesn't happen as often or as easily for West Ham United if Declan Rice stays on the pitch. So I know people think he had a bad game. I know people think that was what he deserved, to be hooked. For me, no. For me, it was the wrong decision from Mikel Arteta. It is just my opinion. Again, I agree that he didn't have a great game, Declan Rice, so I'm not going to go too big on Mikel Arteta getting this wrong. I'm not going to call it a fatal mistake or anything like that, but I disagree with that change. I don't think that change worked. We weren't any better after it, were we?